All right, class, we're back, and we're going to talk about a little bit more about the Nixon presidency, some of his successes, and also his downfall. Now, the one thing to know about Nixon in terms of foreign policy is this term here. It's a French term. It's called détente, but just keep that in mind. And this is an outline of Nixon. He had this famous, victory pose where he put his fingers out like in the shape of a V for victory. So what is détente all about? It's a French word. Again, a lot of political terms are French. I won't go into the history of that. It's pretty long. It's easing the tension. It's relaxing something. So, again, the Cold War, it's like, think of the Kennedy administration, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world could blow to pieces at any second. Nixon's like, we got to calm down, guys. The war in Vietnam's going on, but there's other stuff all around the world and other places, too. And so what Nixon does is he goes to China, and see, China and the Soviets at this point had a border dispute. Now, they're both sort of allied as they're both communist countries, but they were not perfect friends. So Nixon uses this opportunity to go and talk to the Chinese, and the Russians are like, hey, are they working out some secret deal? Hey, Nixon, why don't you come to Russia too? And so he kind of uses the paranoia of both sides to basically make friendlier relationships. So he goes to China, and here he is on Time Magazine, opens trade relations. And then he goes to Moscow. They sign what's called the SALT I Treaty, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. Long story short, it's like, hey, we shouldn't make as many nuclear bombs. Okay, let's not. In the background, yeah, we're still making a lot, but we're just pretending like we're not. Anyway, it's a start. And this is basically what I kind of just said. Here's pictures of Nixon meeting with the Chinese. Interesting thing, this is the first time, so in 1972 was the first time in 20 years that Americans were allowed to go to China. They had closed off their borders to Americans during the time of the Korean War. And again, détente is the main term here. We have new trade policies and treaties for nuclear disarmament, right? Like getting rid of nuclear bombs that we have and not making as many. But here's the question I pose to you. Why was Nixon the perfect person for this job? Okay, think of his past actions in Congress. Back in the 50s, before he was vice president, he was a pretty close ally of Joe McCarthy. And as he wasn't as crazy as Joe McCarthy, but he was known as a communist hunter. Nixon had always, his entire career, been super, super outspoken, anti-communist. For someone like that to go and make deals with different communist countries and try to reduce the tensions, he was perfect for that job because you could tell he was serious about it. It wasn't some guy who everyone had thought, oh, maybe he's a secret communist and, he's going to make a bad deal. No, he was super anti-communist, so I hope it makes sense how if he's going over there to make a deal, people would trust that it was in America's best interests. I hope that makes sense. And there's Nixon. Also, apparently he learned how to eat with chopsticks too. Okay, then, so in 72, Nixon wins one of the biggest landslides in the history of presidential elections. It may be the biggest. Ronald Reagan may have a bigger one. I think Reagan does, but Nixon destroys. He wins 49 states. He only loses Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. Remember, D.C. is not a state, it's a district. Kind of a strange status. And if we look at this electoral map here, every state went Republican, right? Except for Massachusetts and then the District of Columbia. So, knowing this, what happens next doesn't make a lot of sense, but we're going to get into what's called the Watergate scandal. Which, by the way, anytime there's any kind of scandal and it has the name Gate afterward, it all comes back to Watergate. And it just happened to be the name of the hotel where the thing took place. It was called the Watergate Hotel. Now everything's a gate. You can look up all the gates on Wikipedia. There is even a gate. I'm not kidding you. There was some controversy involving a gate somewhere, so it was called Gate. All right. Watergate was the undoing of Nixon. He Personally, Nixon was paranoid. So if we remember the 1960 election, he barely lost to JFK. He won in 1968, the presidency, because the Democratic Party was split in half, essentially. And that third party came in, the segregationist party, and Nixon barely won in 68. So he's like, oh, I can't lose in 72. I have to win no matter what. So he starts this committee for the re-election of the president, which conveniently comes out to CREEP. And he has his guys, he called them the plumbers, and they went into the Watergate Hotel, which was where the Democrats had their party like headquarters for the election, and his guys went in to basically put wiretapping devices in the hotel room and to steal a bunch of documents. And they got caught. We'll get back to that in a second. More scandals. Vice President resigns. He admits cheating on his taxes, and he accepted bribes. What he did was so bad that he had been a lawyer earlier. He lost the ability to practice law, so he couldn't even be a lawyer anymore because he broke the law. But he resigns, and then Nixon needs a new vice president, and so he appoints a high-ranking member in the House of Representatives, Gerald Ford, to be the new vice president. And keep that guy in mind, too, because crazy things are going to happen. So, in 1974, so this is after Nixon's already won, it is revealed and becomes very public news that the FBI investigated and they caught these people who had broken into the Watergate Hotel where the Democrats had all their information at. And what eventually is found out over a long process is that they're connected to the CREEP campaign, right? Nixon's re-election committee, and they were paid to stay silent. So they got in trouble and went to jail, and someone connected to Nixon with some kind of money was like, hey, take this money, do your time in jail, don't say a word. Someone up in the federal government knew what was going on but was scared to speak out, so he secretly contacted these two journalists at the Washington Post, they're very famous, named Woodward and Bernstein. And this guy would fill them in on basically what happened with the Watergate break-in. And so there was an impeachment hearings and people were called in to testify. And during one of the testimonies, someone who had a pretty low-level position but had set up Nixon's office for him had admitted that Nixon had a tape system in place where anytime someone started talking, automatically the conversation would be recorded. Because Nixon was so paranoid, he recorded everything. So Nixon's paranoia was completely his undoing. So it's found out that there are all these tapes from, years of Nixon. They're really going to focus in the 1972 stuff, for the election, for the Watergate crime, but everything, and you can listen to some of them on YouTube. Some of them are horrible things. I mean, the man was an outright racist. There's no question about that. But anyway, they know, now that Congress knows the existence of the tapes, they say, all right, Mr. President, you have to hand them over. And he is like, no, that's my personal private information. Also, I didn't do anything. He's still denying that he did anything. So the House Judiciary Committee, right, these are the guys leading the impeachment inquiry. And again, inquiry, they haven't started an impeachment yet. And they want the tapes from the president's office, and he's holding on to them, and so there's this big fight. So where do we go? If there's a fight between Congress and the president, we're going to go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court rules that Nixon had to turn over these tapes. His whole executive privilege thing, it didn't apply here. So he turns them over. 18 and a half minutes were cut out, and no one to this day knows what was said. But I don't know. Was it some super secret information about maybe Vietnam? Was it some something about, I don't know, aliens, who knows? But yeah, these 18 and a half minutes are lost. And with the tapes and the evidence on them, it is crystal clear that Nixon was fully aware of Watergate, denied it publicly the whole time, but was basically lying to the American people for 2 years, and had participated in covering up this crime. So before an actual impeachment could take place, he resigned because he knew that there's no way he was going to be acquitted. He was definitely going to be convicted and kicked out of office, and he did not want to be the first president to get kicked out of office. So if we go back to think about, so he resigned before they could impeach him. There have been 3 presidents now in U.S. history who've been impeached. We have Andrew Johnson, he was the guy after Lincoln. There was Bill Clinton in the 1990s, and most recently Donald Trump. And in all 3 cases, in the Senate trial, the president was found, the equivalent of not guilty. But with Nixon, the evidence was so clear that there was no chance that would happen, so he resigned before they even went through that. Okay, so if we think back, who's Nixon's vice president? Gerald Ford. Well, now he's the president. Let's skip over this. So Gerald Ford becomes president. The interesting thing is, he's the only president in American history that no one ever voted him for president. Now, when you think about it, when you vote for president, you vote for the president and the vice president. And, when you vote for vice president, you know that person would take over if something were to happen, like the president got assassinated, right? So that's considered a vote. Gerald Ford was in the House of Representatives. And anyway, he becomes president. And then he issues a presidential pardon to Richard Nixon for any crimes he may have committed as president. This was super controversial. People were like, why does Nixon get away with it? He lied to everyone, he schemed and he cheated, and now he doesn't have to pay the price. This is not fair. Which is totally valid point to have. It isn't fair. And why should, the president be treated any differently than anyone else? On the other hand, Ford, the impeachment stuff and Watergate had been dragging on for like 3 years at this point, and the country was consumed by it, and Gerald Ford's like, enough is enough. Let's just move on. We got bigger problems. Vietnam's kind of heating up again. We have the economy to deal with, so let's just end it. Over and done with Nixon's pardon. Let's focus on what we really need to do. So some people said it was a good idea. For other people, it made him very unpopular. He was a good guy. His clumsiness made him a punchline. He tended to fall down a lot and bang his head on things. Here's a picture of him where, getting out of a plane, he actually fell down the stairs. He wasn't. I don't think he was he was actually a college football player. He was a good athlete, but yeah, he seemed to be a little clumsy. So, the pardon of Nixon, my fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over. Watergate is done. We're going to get back to Vietnam. And yeah, the other famous quote in 1975. So, if every January the president goes and gives the State of the Union to Congress, and it's on TV and all this stuff, and they usually talk about how great they're doing and how, we have to do this, we have to do that. Gerald Ford starts out with, my fellow Americans, the State of the Union is not good. So he's going to be a one-term president. Let's just say that. Okay, that's it for that. I'll see you next time.